I remember the morning of my son's wedding with such clarity it might as well have been yesterday. The sky was washed in pale gold, the kind of light that makes everything feel softer, more forgiving. I had woken early, far too early, not from nerves, but from something deeper. A quiet ache I couldn't quite name. I stood at the hotel mirror, adjusting the pearl necklace that had once belonged to my mother. It wasn't extravagant, but it had history, like me. The dress I wore was a soft lavender, simple but elegant. I'd spent weeks picking it out, wanting to look like a mother of the groom without trying too hard, wanting to be noticed, but not in the way that invited whispers. I remember smoothing the fabric over my stomach, taking a breath and whispering, "Today is a good day." But I was wrong. There were signs even before I arrived. Jake hadn't texted me that morning. No see you soon. Mom or thanks for coming, just silence. But I told myself he was busy. He had a million things on his mind. I had raised him better than to forget his mother on his wedding day. Hadn't I? The venue was beautiful, of course. Every detail had Kara's fingerprint on it. Perfect flowers, symmetrical table arrangements, neutral tones, and scripted signs with delicate calligraphy. It looked like a magazine spread. Polished, curated, impeccable, and cold. I scanned the room for Jake when I arrived, but he was nowhere to be seen. Kara's parents welcomed guests with practiced smiles. I approached them, but they barely met my eye. A nod, a polite hello. Then they turned away. Still, I smiled. I told myself to focus on the positive. My son was getting married. This was a joyful day. At the check-in table, a young woman handed me a program and a seating card. She looked confused for a moment, then checked the list again. "Clara, right, you're seated. Here, table 18. Table 18. I glanced at the map, near the exit, beside the catering door, and directly next to a large silver trash bin. I blinked. "This must be a mistake," I said gently. The girl looked again, apologetic. "I'm sorry that's what's listed. I can ask, but the seating's pretty tight." So I walked. Past the floral arch, the happy chatter, the tables full of extended family and friends. I walked past my sisters who gave me puzzled looks. I waved it off. I couldn't explain what I didn't yet believe myself. I arrived at table 18, and yes, there it was. A small folding chair, a name card with my name printed neatly, and the trash can. No centerpiece, no candles, just a cold steel bin and the faint smell of lemon disinfectant. I sat, slowly. I watched as Jake's old college buddies were ushered to prime seats near the dance floor. Kara's stylist had a seat at the front. Even Jake's third-grade teacher was nestled beside the cake table. And I, the woman who gave birth to him, who raised him alone after his father died, was placed beside refuse. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. I did neither. Because mothers are trained to swallow the lump in their throat, to smile when it hurts, to clap when they are forgotten. The ceremony began. Kara walked down the aisle like a goddess. Applause, cameras flashing, music swelling. Then Jake appeared. My Jake. My little boy who once brought me dandelions and called them roses. The boy who cried into my arms when he scraped his knees. The one I stayed up with during fevers, school projects, and heartbreaks. He didn't look at me. Not once. Not even when they exchanged vows. Not even when they lit the unity candle. Not even when Kara's father stood and gave a speech that began with, "It takes a great man to love, but it takes a great woman to raise that man." And I'm proud to say Kara had that. Laughter, cheers. I froze. He had said Kara, not me, not even a glance in my direction, and I realized then that I hadn't just lost my seat. I had lost my place in his life. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Plates were served, speeches made, dances danced. My table remained largely unvisited. No one asked me to stand. No one handed me a microphone. I was the ghost of motherhood present, but unseen. When it was time for the mother-son dance, Kara's mother took the floor with Jake. The announcer called it a special surprise. I felt something in my chest crack open, but I clapped. because that's what mothers do. Later that night, I left without saying goodbye. I slipped out the back, passing the same trash can I had sat beside. I didn't take the program. I didn't keep the name card. But I took the memory, etched into me like frostbite, silent, cold, and irreversible. And as I lay in bed that night, still in my lavender dress, still wearing my mother's pearls, I whispered to the ceiling, I came here hoping to witness the start of his forever. Instead, I witnessed the end of mine. It didn't begin at the wedding. That moment, seated beside the trash can, forgotten and displaced, was just the final nail in a coffin built over years. Looking back, the fading started so gradually, I mistook it for growth. After his father died, Jake and I had been everything to each other. We were a team. I worked double shifts at the diner, packed his lunches with handwritten notes, and read to him every night, even when I could barely keep my eyes open. Every achievement of his felt like a shared victory. His first spelling bee. His college acceptance letter. The first time he shaved and left stubble in the sink. I was there. I remember all of it. But the letting go didn't happen in one sweeping motion. It was slow, like a tide retreating inch by inch while you're too busy looking at the sky to notice the shore emptying. After college, Jake moved 3 states away. I understood. He wanted independence, space, a chance to become his own man. And I was proud, so proud to have raised someone brave enough to chase a future. But then the calls came less often. The visits shrank from weekends to holidays to sometimes not this year, Mom. I told myself it was normal. Boys grow up, men get busy. And Kara entered his life like a graceful storm, all polish and confidence. She was beautiful, ambitious, poised. From the start, I felt the shift. The first time I met her, she shook my hand. Not a hug, not a smile that reached her eyes. Just a handshake, as if I were the landlord or a business partner. She complimented my casserole but didn't take a second bite. She looked around my small house with an expression that tried to hide judgment behind politeness. Jake watched her every move, and slowly he started watching me less. I noticed how he began to correct my phrasing, how he interrupted my stories to clarify details, how he rolled his eyes when I spoke of his childhood in front of her, as if my memories embarrassed him. As if the boy who once begged me to sing him to sleep was a phase he'd outgrown. I still tried. I sent care packages. I offered to help with the wedding. I suggested hosting the rehearsal dinner at the family home. But Kara had a planner. She had a vision. And that vision didn't include me. Jake didn't say no outright. He said things like, "It's complicated," or "Let's keep it simple," or "We're going a different direction." Different direction. Funny how gentle words can carry sharp blades. The guest list came. I wasn't allowed a +1. "We're keeping things intimate," he said. The family photo display at the reception, none of the pictures included me. They showed Jake with his friends, Jake with Kara, Jake at school at internships, but not Jake on my lap as a baby. Not Jake in Halloween costumes I stitched myself. Not Jake and I covered in flour after baking cookies on snow days. When I asked about it, he said, "We didn't want it to feel too nostalgic." Too nostalgic. As if my presence would age the room, as if love to them had an expiration date. I began to feel like a character in someone else's story, recast, rewritten, or quietly removed. The past we shared no longer fit the aesthetic they curated. The pain was not in rejection alone. It was in erasure. But still I showed up. Still I bought the lavender dress. Still I packed the pearl necklace. Still I smiled. Because that's what mothers do, isn't it? We show up even when we're being asked to fade. I remember calling my sister the night before the wedding. I told her, "I have a strange feeling, like I'm being invited out of obligation, not love." She paused, then said gently, "Then go for yourself, Clara. Not for him, not for them. Just for you. Show up so that one day you'll know you did." I took her advice. But I wasn't prepared. I wasn't prepared for the way Kara's bridesmaids looked through me. I wasn't prepared for how Jake avoided eye contact. I wasn't prepared to feel like a stranger at my own son's celebration. The years had taken him away slowly, but that day took him away entirely. And yet, here's the truth I couldn't admit to myself back then. I had enabled it. By saying, it's okay when it wasn't. By excusing silences as busyness. By lowering my expectations until they lay flat on the ground. I loved him so much, I let him unlove me in return. But something changed the moment I sat next to that trash can. Not in him, in me. I felt a line cross in my chest, a quiet voice rise and whisper, "This is not love, this is not respect, and you are allowed to want both." That night I went back to my hotel room. I took off the pearls, folded the lavender dress, looked in the mirror and said aloud, "You are still Clara, you are still here." I didn't know then how healing would begin, but I knew it had to. The wedding day had passed, but the ache it left behind clung to me like a second skin. When I returned home, I set my suitcase down at the foot of the stairs and stood in the silence. The house was still. There were no echoes of children's feet, no laughter bouncing off the walls, just the distant hum of the fridge and the heaviness of absence. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table Jake once did his homework on. The place where he once cried over geometry, where I once made grilled cheese sandwiches and wiped chocolate off his chin. That table had seen love. It had seen life. And now it saw only me alone, silent, trying to understand what had broken between us. The pain of the wedding wasn't just in the moment itself. It was in everything it revealed. All the silences I had ignored. All the signs I had misread. And most of all, the bitter confirmation that I no longer had a place in his world. I looked at my phone. No new messages, no missed calls, not even a thank you. Jake hadn't noticed my exit. He hadn't followed up. No mom, where did you go? No apology. Not even a text with a photo from the wedding. It was as if I hadn't been there at all. A ghost. That's what I had become. And I wondered, when did I start becoming invisible to him? I wanted to scream. Not out of anger, but out of grief. A primal grief that only mothers know, the grief of being forgotten by the very life you created. But I didn't scream. I cleaned. I folded laundry I had already folded. I swept floors that were already clean. Because sometimes when your heart is chaos, you seek order in the simplest motions. Days passed, then a week, then two. The mailman came and went. The neighbors waved. Life moved on. Except mine didn't. And one afternoon, I received a wedding photo from a distant cousin. In it, Jake and Kara stood laughing, arms around each other. The sun lit up their faces. Behind them stood Kara's parents, the bridal party, the officiant. I wasn't in the frame. Of course I wasn't. But there was something else. Zooming in, I could see table 18 in the distant background, my chair, and next to it in sharp focus was the trash can. I stared at the image for what felt like hours, not because of what was in it, but because of what it confirmed. It wasn't just an oversight. I wasn't forgotten. I was excluded. That night, I wrote a letter I never sent. "Dear Jake, I don't know what hurt more, that you didn't see me or that you did and chose not to. I don't need flowers. I don't need fanfare. I just wanted to matter. I wanted to be seen. Do you remember when you broke your arm falling from the jungle gym? You were 7. I sat beside your hospital bed all night, holding your hand, whispering stories until you slept. Do you remember how I promised that as long as I was alive, you'd never be alone? I kept that promise. Even when you left home. Even when your calls stopped. Even when your invitations became formalities. But now I see I was the only one holding on." I folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer. Sometimes healing starts with writing what you're not ready to say. I didn't know who I was without being Jake's mother. That role had defined me for so long. It was my compass, my purpose, my identity. So when that was taken, not with malice, but with apathy, I felt adrift. But in that drifting, something unexpected stirred. Memory. Not of Jake. Of me. I remembered the girl who loved to paint, the woman who once dreamed of seeing Italy, the student who had published poems in her college journal, the friend who made people laugh until they cried. She was still in there, somewhere beneath the grief, beneath the years of sacrifice. She hadn't died. She had just gone quiet. The world may have given me a seat by the trash can, but I didn't have to stay there, so I got up, literally and figuratively. I joined a local book club. I started walking every morning. I pulled out my paints. Each stroke of color on the canvas was like breathing again. Each page turned in a novel reminded me I still had curiosity. Each sunrise I witnessed whispered, "You're still here. You still count." I didn't stop missing Jake, but I stopped waiting for him to notice. And in that release, I began to reclaim something I had long forgotten myself. In the weeks that followed the wedding, I moved through life like a shadow. There were no more calls, no updates from Jake. The silence between us, once temporary and explainable, had become a permanent fixture. I tried not to check my phone. I tried not to hope. But hope is a quiet companion. It lingers long after you ask it to leave. People around me assumed I was fine. I smiled. I attended church. I bought groceries. On the surface, I was a woman getting on with her life. But inside, something was unraveling. The pain of being erased is not like a clean cut, it's more like a slow bleed. The kind that leaves you lightheaded and wondering when exactly you started dying inside. Everywhere I went, I saw signs of the life I used to have. At the grocery store, a little boy tugged at his mother's sleeve asking for cereal. I remembered when Jake used to do the same, when he would beg for the sugariest box on the shelf, eyes wide with mischief. At the library, I saw a young man reading to his toddler. I had done that too. I had planted the seeds of language and wonder in my son. Now those memories felt like relics. He had moved on. I hadn't been invited. The hardest part wasn't that he forgot me. It was that he chose to forget. He curated a life, a story, a family, and I didn't fit the narrative. For a long time, I blamed Kara. I told myself she was the reason, her influence, her disapproval of my simplicity, my lack of polish. But even that excuse began to feel thin. Jake had made a choice. You cannot be removed from someone's life unless they let go of your hand. And he had. But despite the sadness, I felt something shift. A faint defiance that I hadn't known was still inside me. I began to question the version of motherhood I had subscribed to, the one that demanded I be selfless to the point of disappearance, the one that told me to always give, to always show up even when I wasn't wanted. What if I didn't? What if I let myself matter to myself? One Sunday morning, I skipped church. Instead, I packed a lunch and drove to a nearby park. I sat on a bench and watched the wind play in the trees. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt like a woman, a real one, present and breathing. And that's when I made a promise to myself. If they could erase me, I could rewrite myself. That evening, I cleared out Jake's old room. Not out of spite, out of necessity. It had remained untouched for years, a shrine to a boy who no longer existed. I folded clothes he'd never wear again, packed up trophies he hadn't claimed, dusted shelves that hadn't felt his hands in a decade. I turned it into a study, a sanctuary, a place for books and plants and candles and soft light, a place for me. And there in that space I began to write. At first just journal entries, letters to no one, reflections, but then something more. I started a blog, anonymous, quiet, tucked into a corner of the internet. I wrote about motherhood, about invisibility, about grief that doesn't come from death but from rejection. And to my surprise, people read it. They responded. Mothers, fathers, grandparents, even grown children who had left and were starting to realize the weight of that leaving. The blog gave me something I hadn't felt in years, belonging. I wasn't alone. I had simply been silent in a world that needed my voice. One entry titled "A Seat Beside the Trash Can" went viral. The comments flooded in. Women said, "You wrote my story." Men admitted they hadn't called their mothers in months and now felt ashamed. Some even said they had cried. I read each comment with trembling hands, not because they were praising me, but because they saw me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. A month later, I received a letter. It was from Jake. The handwriting was unmistakable. I held the envelope for hours before opening it. Inside, his words spilled awkwardly like someone stumbling in the dark. Mom, I saw your post. I didn't know how much I had hurt you. Maybe I didn't want to know. Maybe it was easier not to look. But I'm looking now, and I see it. I'm sorry. I want to talk, if you want to talk. Love, Jake. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't moved, but because for the first time I had something stronger than tears. Clarity. I didn't respond right away, not out of revenge, but because I needed to know that my worth didn't hinge on his apology. The blog kept growing. People began asking for interviews. A publisher reached out. I declined most of it, but not all. I wasn't looking to become famous. I was simply becoming whole. Every day I wrote, I stitched a part of myself back together. And one day, as I lit a candle in my new study, I realized something profound. The ceremony that mattered wasn't the one where I sat beside the bin. It was this one, the quiet daily ritual of choosing myself. It had been 3 weeks since I received Jake's letter. It remained on my kitchen table untouched, except for the one time I read it through trembling fingers. Sometimes I would sit with my tea and glance at the envelope as though it might say more if I waited long enough. But it didn't. It sat there silent and still offering an apology that was both a balm and a burden. What did it mean, really? Did it change anything? The world had taught me to crave apologies. We all want to be acknowledged, to have our pain witnessed. And yet, when Jake finally did it, when he admitted he saw me, it didn't bring the closure I expected. I had spent so long hoping he would reach out, and now that he had, I wasn't sure how to feel. Was it too late? Could love regrow in a soil that had been so thoroughly neglected? I didn't rush to answer him. Instead, I turned inward. I began waking up earlier, not out of obligation, but to watch the sunrise. I would sit on my porch with a blanket and a cup of coffee, listening to the birds begin their day. There was something deeply humbling in realizing that the sun rose whether Jake called or not, whether I was included or not. Life kept offering beauty even to those who had been left behind. I began to write more earnestly. My blog was no longer a place of grief, it had become a place of truth. I shared stories of healing, of rediscovering joy, of finding myself in little things, baking a pie from scratch, laughing at an old sitcom, dancing alone in the kitchen. And the readers responded. They weren't just reacting, they were transforming alongside me. Then one night, after a particularly moving comment from a woman named Rosita, who said she hadn't spoken to her daughter in 5 years, I picked up Jake's letter again. I read it more slowly this time. This wasn't just a letter from a son to his mother. It was a letter from a boy who had finally realized that growing up didn't mean growing away. He was reaching, tentatively, imperfectly, but he was reaching, and I had a choice. I could punish him for the years of silence, or I could model what I had always told him love meant, forgiveness with boundaries. So I wrote back, "Dear Jake, thank you for your letter. I read it many times. I want you to know that I do forgive you. Not because the hurt wasn't real, but because I refuse to let that hurt define either of us. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back to how things were. It means beginning again with honesty. I'd like that if you're ready. Love always, Mom." I mailed the letter the next morning. A week later he called. His voice was quiet, not ashamed exactly, but smaller, like the Jake I remembered when he was 10 and trying to explain how the window had gotten broken. "Hi, Mom. I got your letter." "Hi, Jake." Silence. Then, "Can I come visit?" And just like that, something opened. Not a floodgate, but a window. When he arrived that Saturday, I saw the same boy beneath the beard and wedding ring. His eyes held uncertainty. Mine held patience. We talked. Not about the wedding, not yet. We talked about his job, his apartment, the new puppy he and Kara had adopted. We danced around the wounds, both aware they were there but unwilling to poke them too soon. And then after lunch he asked if he could see his old room. He stood in the doorway, stunned. "You turned it into a study," he said. "Yes," I replied. "I needed a place to grow." He nodded slowly, running a hand along the bookshelf. "It looks peaceful." "It is." He looked at me. "I'm glad." And that's when it happened. He began to cry, not sobs, not theatrics, just tears quiet steady. I didn't mean to push you out, he said. I didn't know how to keep you in and make space for everything else. I walked over. I didn't hug him. I stood close and said, I never needed to be in everything, Jake. I just needed to not be discarded. He nodded. We both cried. Later that night after he left, I looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't see a woman who had been erased. I saw a woman who had been rewritten by her own hand. The journey wasn't over. There would be more conversations, more discomfort, more relearning. But the difference now was that I was no longer waiting to be chosen. I had already chosen myself. And from that place of strength, I could welcome him not as the center of my world, but as a part of it. In the weeks after Jake's visit, I kept replaying the moment he stood in the doorway of his old room, now my study, and saw me for the first time in years. Not as a role, not as a utility, but as a person. It was a moment small in sound but loud in meaning. It stayed with me, echoing across quiet mornings and late-night reflections. And yet there remained one door unopened: the wedding. We had danced around it like two people circling a fire, unsure if stepping closer would warm us or burn us, until the day Jake called again. Mom, he said, his voice steadier now. Can we talk about the wedding? I closed my eyes. Yes, we should. He offered to come by that weekend. I made tea and cleaned the kitchen, though I wasn't expecting a performance, just a reckoning. When he arrived, there was no hesitation. He sat down, looked me in the eyes, and said, I'm sorry, not just for that day, for all the days before it. It was a beginning. He didn't make excuses. He didn't shift blame. He spoke of pressure of trying to fit into Kara's world, of trying to prove he could be independent, polished, grown. And in that, he admitted, I erased the person who got me there. I let his words land. I didn't interrupt. This wasn't about punishing him. It was about hearing him and being heard. Then he asked the question that had sat like a stone between us. Why didn't you say anything that day? I paused. Because, Jake, I said gently, I had already been made to feel invisible. What louder protest is there than silence? He nodded. Shame flickered across his face. I thought you left because you were upset, he said. I left, I said, slowly, because staying felt like agreeing with how I was being treated. And I couldn't do that, not to you, and not to myself. He swallowed hard. I've replayed that day 1,000 times. Seeing you at table 18 beside the trash can? He shook his head. I don't know how I missed it. You didn't miss it, I said. You looked away. We sat in the stillness. No television, no distractions. Just two people untangling a knot years in the making. I want you in my life, Jake said finally. Really in it. Not as a box I check, not as a seasonal obligation. As my mother. Tears filled my eyes, but they didn't fall. Then you'll have to earn your way back in, I said gently. Not because I want to punish you, but because I need to know that I matter beyond the moments that are convenient. I understand. He did. I could see it. What followed was a series of small rebuildings. Jake called every Sunday. He sent me photos of the puppy, of his cooking attempts, of random things he thought would make me laugh. I didn't respond right away. I didn't rush to close the distance, because healing is not a race. During that time, I kept writing. My blog became a book proposal. I began speaking at local women's groups. One afternoon, I gave a talk titled The Art of Reappearing. I stood in front of a group of women, many older than me, and told the story of the wedding, the seat by the trash can, the silence, the letter, the reckoning. When I finished, no one clapped at first. They just sat with it. And then one by one, they rose to their feet. It wasn't applause. It was solidarity. Afterward, a woman approached me, eyes red with tears. You said what I couldn't find the words for, she whispered. You gave shape to my grief. That night, I realized something. My pain had not been pointless. It had become a path. And Jake, my Jake, was learning to walk it with me. One Sunday, he called and said, Kara wants to talk to you. I hesitated. I understand if you're not ready, he added quickly, but she's been reading your blog. She wants to apologize too. I agreed. When Kara came on the line, her voice was softer than I remembered. Gone was the edge, the cool polish. She was human now. Clara, she began, I owe you the biggest apology. I let my insecurity become cruelty. I thought if Jake stayed close to you, there wouldn't be space for me. But I see now, I see what I tried to erase. And I'm sorry. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't poetic. But it was real. And I accepted it. Not because I needed her approval, but because I had moved past needing to carry the weight of her rejection. In the months that followed, Jake and Kara invited me to dinner. Just the three of us. No performance, no posturing, just a meal. When I arrived, they had set the table with my favorite tea. Kara had made the casserole recipe from my blog. There was a place card at the head of the table. It read, Mom. I smiled. I sat. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't beside the trash can. I was at the table. A year had passed since the wedding, 12 months of rebuilding, of conversations both gentle and raw, of healing not through grand gestures, but through the quiet, stubborn insistence on showing up. Jake and I spoke regularly now. Kara and I had found a rhythm tentative at first, but real. There was laughter, invitations, the occasional silence, but no longer the kind that bruised. They even asked me to join them on a holiday in spring. I declined, not out of bitterness, but because I had made other plans. Plans that didn't revolve around being someone's mother or mother-in-law. Plans that didn't wait for inclusion. I was going to Ireland. It was something I had promised myself a long time ago, before Jake, before motherhood, before the years blurred into service. I had seen photos once in a bookshop, a woman standing at the edge of the cliffs of Moher Wind and her hair arms outstretched like wings. I had whispered then, half in jest, someday I want to feel that free. Now that someday had become now. I packed light a journal, a few good books, warm sweaters, sturdy boots. On the day of my flight, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was unmistakable. Jake. I sat down and opened it slowly. Mom, I know you're traveling soon, and I didn't want to let this moment pass. Thank you for everything, for your grace, for your strength, for loving me even when I didn't deserve it. I used to think you'd always be there, so I forgot to cherish you. But I see you now. Not just as my mother, but as a whole person, and I'm proud of the woman you are. Come back when you're ready. We'll be waiting. Love, Jake. I folded the letter and tucked it into my coat pocket. On the plane, I watched the clouds move beneath us like waves. I thought about all the places I had once wanted to go, all the dreams I had shelved, because someone else's needs felt more urgent than mine. It hadn't been a mistake to love so fully, but it had been a loss to forget that I too was someone worth loving. Ireland was everything I hoped it would be: wild, quiet, alive. The cliffs didn't disappoint. I stood at the edge, wind whipping my hair into a frenzy coat flapping like a sail. The sea roared below, timeless and vast. I felt small, but not diminished. I felt for the first time in decades unburdened. I reached into my coat and pulled out Jake's letter. I reread it with tears in my eyes, not from pain this time, but from release. I took out a pen and wrote my reply on the back. Jake, I have forgiven you. But more than that, I have forgiven myself. For staying silent too long, for disappearing inside roles, for believing I needed someone else's love to feel whole. You are my son, and I love you. But I've learned to love me too, and that may be the most important thing I've ever done. See you soon. Love, Mom. I didn't send the letter. I kept it. Not everything needs to be said to be true. Back in my cottage, I lit a candle and opened my journal. I wrote, Today I stood at the edge and didn't look for someone to catch me. I am the wind. I am the sea. I am my own. I smiled. The story hadn't ended at the wedding. It hadn't ended at the apology. The real ending, the real beginning, was here in this quiet room, in this steady heart, in this woman who no longer begged for a seat, but built her own table. The world may have once put me beside the trash can, but I had walked to the cliffs of freedom, and I had flown,